Let's kick this off. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us for today's Frontline Fridays session, Driving Successful Adoption and Delivering Value for Frontline Employees. I'm Lisa McKee, and I'm joined by one of my best friends, Irina Parsina. We sit within the engineering organization and have had the lucky privilege over the last several years to be working on behalf of engineering directly with customers across the globe and across industries, specifically on helping them make the most of experiences for frontline workers. So we've really been focused not just on the how do they implement and deploy, but maybe more important to the topic that we're going to discuss today, how do they get something that is worthwhile to put in place? So that's really going to be the focus for our session today. Now, as we get started, the next slide, please. Let me just do a little bit of a landing. This is part of a full session for Frontline Fridays. You can read more on the blog, and then on the next slide, we'll see the series of sessions that are upcoming. So there was previously one focused on overview and deployment best practices. If you weren't able to join and catch that, I encourage you to go back and get the recording. Today, we're going to focus on adoption. Upcoming next session will be on communications. And as you can see, we've got a lineup up through August. So let's talk for just a quick minute around interactivity for this presentation. Irina and I do love to talk, but we'd also like to hear from you throughout this. So you will actually be on mute for your microphone for the duration of the discussion, but we do have a bunch of polls interspersed throughout here. So we would love to have you participate and join and provide your feedback there. We also would love it if you would make liberal use of the meeting chat. Chime in when you've got commentary, feedback, questions. We'll try to cover them as best as we can within the session. And then at the end, if we have time, hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit of live Q&A as well. We'll see how we get to there. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We are going to do a little bit of just some foundational introduction and then really hop into what makes a valuable solution and take a quick peek at an example of a solution that a customer may have put into place. Then we're also going to talk a little bit about common places to get started and critical considerations as you're thinking about scoping and moving towards either putting something in place or expanding what you've already got. And the last big section will be focused on driving adoption at scale with some best practices and some tips around that. And then we'll wrap it up at the very end with some next steps and hopefully have some time to chat live. So with that in mind, I think we have our first poll. We'd love to just have a quick read from you. What are you hoping to learn from this session today? So if you could take just a moment to type in what you're hoping to learn, that would be fantastic. Right, I'm seeing some great insight, although some of these I think are getting truncated a little bit, but looking for guidance around thoughts on rolling out to retail workers, some alternate points of view and perspectives from employee strategy to get to deskless employees, some approaches for driving adoption. It looks like also looking for some insights around manufacturing environments, food and beverage and utilities. That's great. It looks like we've also must have great representation across a variety of industries too. That's fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you for weighing in. We'll certainly try to weave in some examples that help touch on some of those as we're proceeding today. So let's talk just for a moment about some of what you're going to see here. I'm just going to front load this conversation a little bit with, this is not a session where we're going to go in deep on detailed implementation, like from a technical perspective. This is really how can you get to those end views. So one of the first things I want to just frame from a product and strategy perspective on behalf of Microsoft, though, is that Where we've really focused from improving and advancing your ability to bring solutions for Frontline is on having a focus around a single unified platform that you can tailor to a simple and expansive experience depending on your needs in one place. So simple enough to bring multiple experiences that are prioritized right into a single pane of glass, but also so that it's smart enough to have integration with workflows that you may have through yourself, through a third-party provider, and then have AI integrated across all of that. And finally, that we provide a great level of enterprise level security and compliance protection so that you can make sure that your data is protected and your confidential information is maintained within your organization. So let's take for a quick look at just how we've strategically chosen to do that with Microsoft Teams as the foundation for that experience. So the benefit of Teams is that Teams is the place that we've invested in being able to bring in the best of native capabilities plus extensibility capabilities. And what that means is that you can take advantage of experiences that Microsoft has built for anybody to use, depending on your resources, starting with those foundational experiences around secure identity and device management, but also bringing in a home experience, bringing in modern communications, or maybe you are really focused on improving operations. Maybe you're looking to connect with your employees and really foster direct engagement and support their well-being. But you can also bring to bear where you may have relevant third parties or your own data or your own apps and bring those into one surface. And we've heard from a lot of customers that one of the huge problems they're trying to solve is to reduce some of the sprawl and have a little bit more of a cohesive, centralized place for employees to navigate to just what's most important to them. And so from a Microsoft perspective, Teams is where we've chosen to do that. But if we step back from the technology for a second, let's talk for a moment about how do you get to something that's really valuable? Because just throwing technology out at the wall isn't necessarily going to be that your employees are going to use it, or that they will find value, or you'll achieve some of the underlying experiences or bottom line improvements that you're looking to achieve. So fundamentally, the most important thing around value is that it solves real problems. So this is where we really need to dig into the heart of understanding if there's a specific challenge or issue, both maybe that you're facing as an organization to improve operational efficiency, or you've heard feedback from your frontline workers on things that impact their ability to stay informed and do their jobs well, or feel as a connected employee to your organization. But at heart, valuable solutions are the ones that solve an actual problem. And so what we're going to walk through today is how can you start arriving at what a valuable solution might look like, as well as how you might get there and get started. Real quick, before we explore a little bit further, let's talk just for a moment about what happens if you don't deliver enough value, because this is really important. And we see this percolate with our customers quite often. When we lead with the technology and start with the how do we accomplish something instead of what are we trying to solve? Or if we look at just doing a checkbox exercise, my incumbent experience has this, and I want that same list of features without really thinking about how they may apply to helping an employee do their job more efficiently or more effectively, or stay connected to corporate culture. We find that those kinds of experiences where we're divorced from some of the underlying problems and the humans that we're looking to impact lead to a lack of adoption. People won't understand why we're asking them to change or asking them to use an experience. And then that results in increased costs relative to the value that you're trying to provide and decreases the ROI that you get from your investment. So again, it's really important to think through, and you can do this methodically. Think through how are you going to impact your bottom line, but really keep humans at the center with some of the problems you're trying to solve. So to that end, I'm going to turn it over to Irina to walk us through an example first, and then we'll dig in a little bit with some tactics you can use to help make sure you're delivering value.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisa. And hi, everybody. Again, super delighted to have you join us today. If you joined one of I think the very first session, so this is the second session in the series, you would have already met Woodgrove and know a little bit we're going to spend a little bit of time really working through Woodgrove as an example. And whilst this is a retail example, some of the challenges that we're going to walk through, as Lisa had mentioned, the criticality of making sure that the solution solves the challenge, a real challenge that is experienced by an employee in the frontline, is probably the most critical part of success. Those challenges are also applicable across other industries too. But let's pause here and actually get to know Woodgrove. So Woodgrove Grocery has about 1,500 stores. They have about 30,000 employees and have about 10,000 store support or sort of corporate functions that tend to be more desk bound than the 30,000 deskless workers. In terms of the tools and systems that are in place, you have Workday that is really there to support human resources aspects. You have a UKG system that is really there to support workforce management, ADP for payroll, SAP for some of the inventory systems, and then ServiceNow for a lot of the knowledge base around how to handle the tools and the systems that support the day-to-day operational tasks in the store. So Woodgrove specifically, there are a few challenges. And again, for those of you who were there in the first session, I do encourage you, if you haven't, to go back and listen in, because we actually go through the more of the how to solve a lot of the challenges that we articulate. But ultimately, and hopefully you'll see, well, not hopefully, I hope none of you will see yourself in the challenges that we're sharing here today. But the reality of it is you probably do have something similar that you're experiencing in your organization today. From a communication perspective, we see this consistently, that despite the latest tech, there's a lot of the corporate communication does tend to really center around messages that I emailed and shared mailboxes that might not even be necessarily shared mailboxes, but kind of generic shared passwords and email addresses that are really for everybody to access. There's a lot of access, there's a lot of dependency on printing and communication huddles that are really physical and other verbal communication methods. Again, these are not necessarily having that verbal communication is not a challenge per se, but when it's the only way in which you can communicate and share critical information day to day, that becomes a bit of a challenge. Now, there's also, and we often hear this across all industries, that one of the biggest challenges in the front line is there's a sense, especially on the front line, that I'm completely disconnected from anyone who's just a little bit above the kind of my direct immediate manager. And another kind of poor practice that we're seeing, and Woodgrove sadly is not immune to that, is a practice of really hogging information so that it makes others feel completely disengaged and disconnected from the organization. And again, Woodgrove is not dissimilar to a lot of organizations out there. There is still a reliance on consumer grade applications for day-to-day comms. There's also challenges around operations. So whether it's key processes or tools that are all over from separate systems, or having processes be very manual. Often a lot of the customers that we work with, when we do an inventory of tools that an employee is having to rely on in their day-to-day, it can be anything from 15, which was probably the lowest number that I have seen, to 65, which is the highest number that I have seen more recently, but it is the reality. And actually there comes almost this necessity of knowing how to do the job, which makes it really hard to also bring new people into the role to help support functions, whether it's, for Woodgrove specifically, every time they're needing to bring in additional staff, those sort of ingrained apps and patterns and behaviors, there's not necessarily consistency across all of these systems, and these processes are really hard to share with new people. There's also audits and a lot of information and processes, basically PDFs that are not really accessible. And of course, whilst SharePoint is the CMS of choice at Woodgrove, it still becomes highly inaccessible for employees who are on the front line. Now, scheduling and payslip is another area, and we kind of go, you'll see these themes consistently as we share more holistically where to hunt for sort of problems that could be solved. So where to hunt for value, which again, as Lisa had shared, is the most critical, is one of the most critical, if not the most critical factor in ensuring that a solution is actually adopted, because it needs to work for me. It needs to solve a problem that I have as an employee. And so scheduling and payslip is a really big area where we often see a lot of challenges arise. So for example, whilst there might be a really important critical system that supports a lot of the sort of financial and legal aspects of employee movements and employee being essentially part of the of Woodgrove, a lot of the swaps are done in a process that is more of a conversation. Or another really kind of common practice, and sadly not a great practice that we see, and Woodgrove also suffers from that, is that it's really up to the manager's favorite to get the shift that they want. And it becomes really challenging for somebody again to feel like they could be really truly engaged with Woodgrove, because they feel really left out of core things or core benefits that help them manage their day to day. Now, there's also a huge amount of reliance on personal accounts, and so that also means that Woodgrove is highly exposed to potential privacy issues as well. You have also this additional challenge of stores being acquired, scheduling systems being Excel and pen and paper, and how do we actually manage all of this? And one of the things that you'll see in a little bit is that often it's not about solving the problem holistically for everybody. It's not about creating this integration of all of these systems that are really providing the scheduling. Maybe it's about solving on the front line an end user experience where a frontline employee has a consistent experience for them. And there might be different systems that are backing that up. And that is, as Lisa had mentioned at the beginning, one of the core values of Microsoft Solutions is that it's about providing a consistent front end, the front door for your frontline employees. Whilst the systems in the back end could be really messy, and really you can just sort of say, look, let's not look there, jazz hands. Is just make sure that actually the employees that really matter, the ones that are working on the front lines of your business, are getting the things that they need in their day to day. Now, training is another core area of challenges for Woodgrove. There's a lot of things from, essentially having access to shared PCs, or a lot of the training is done in a personal manual fashion. So again, some other additional challenges where that happens. And one of the biggest challenges that we often come across when it comes to customers, and Woodgrove is no stranger to that, is identity. It's why they have the shared mailboxes where everyone knows the password and the email address, because it says something like storex@woodgrove.com, and everyone knows a password to it. But they have some shared devices that made some really great investments in technology, and there is an opportunity to enable every single employee to be really part of this digital ecosystem that Woodgrove has created. So as we set the tone for some of the challenges, here's a reason why they wanted to, even think about solutions that could potentially deliver value, because they have some specific strategic goals. And I won't go through all of those, because I really want to make sure that we go through almost the examples of some of how these challenges are solved, and get to the nitty gritty of how you can really articulate, figure out, and find what are those problems that are worth solving in your organization, because those problems are the problems you should really start with. Because again, and we'll probably say it so many times, so I apologize for the repetition, but as those of you who've covered ProSci know, it takes 5 to 7 times. So we really do repeat things 5 to 7 times. So apologies for the repetition yet again. But essentially, the most critical part is making sure that this solution that you're offering provides value, so that it's a no-brainer for the employee to leverage it, so that it's essentially something that they're intrinsically motivated to do. And that's really where you want to be. In absence of that, you're getting into a place where you're having to create a bit more of a structured process, which again, we will cover. We have a dedicated section on that at the end. So we'll get straight into actually understanding what Woodgrove is offering to their frontline workers, and really work through that example. And again, I hope you'll see some of the some of your organization in this, and then we'll get into the process of figuring out the right challenges to solve in your organization. But before we do that, one of the things that we do know, and I'd love to hear from you, is I'm sure you're not starting from scratch. I'm sure you have existing technology in place. I'm sure some of it is solving for some of the challenges that you have. Some of it is actually contributing to the challenges that you have. So I'd love to hear from you, if you can, where you're starting, where you're starting from. Do you have some of the foundations in place that we've covered, or it's really just kind of, you know, really genuinely are starting from scratch, which again is also would love to hear from you. And I sip some water whilst this is happening, and then I'm going to monitor myself in terms of not spilling all this water on me, which will not happen. It has a tendency to happen in every single webinar that I do. So
looks like we have a good mix,
here.
though, Irina, of where people are at today, both
Perfect.
some, ranging from some foundations in place to scenarios established and working on implementing, or frontline workers have access to M365, but no specific scenarios in place just yet. So it's a good variety of where people are at.
Excellent. Okay, so I hope, and actually I'd love to, because one of the things that we're going to walk through is Mona's day in the life of. So all of those challenges that we set out for Woodgrove, and of course, we've got the can help solve some of the challenges and figuring out what these challenges are. But let's go through some of these challenges are solved, so that hopefully you will see yourself. For those of you who already invested in your frontline, you'll see some of your solutions already represented in this Woodgrove's experience. Or for those of you who haven't, and might get inspired. So as we get into the next steps, practical steps, you have a kind of practical vision look like. So one of the things that we talked about is the fact that Mona and employees at Woodgrove have a real challenge with identity signing in. There's shared identities everywhere. So one of the key things that we're looking to do is to make sure that the solution is actually really easy to get into. So whether it's, primarily if I'm leveraging a mobile device because I'm not somebody who is sat at a desk, how can I whilst making sure that the security
audio
is there.
Irina, sorry to interrupt you. Your audio is cutting in and out just a little bit.
Oh, okay. Let's try this again. Is this a little bit better?
Yep, you sound okay right now. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things that we have identified as challenges and is essentially making sure that whilst identity and security is often a huge challenge on the front line, that whatever the solution we offers that simple and easy sign in. So one of the ways in which Mona is making sure that she has access to things in a secure way is through the QR sign in. So here she's signing in to her shared device, and then essentially she can scan the code, and that's the code that's on her badge. And then from there, she is in by providing a PIN number. And by doing that, she is logging in. Now, I know the QR Plus PIN, and I think we have some dedicated sessions specifically on the technical aspects of that, but the QR Plus PIN is just some of the ways in which customers globally have told us they would love to solve for the challenge of really, really challenging sign-in process. And I also want to make sure that it is essentially something that is a sign-in process that is respectful of any additional risk that I might be introducing by giving Mona at Woodgrove an identity. And again, I think, Lisa, you're covering a little bit more on this from an adoption perspective, but that's kind of, if I look at kind of a tally of solutions or challenges that we're solving for, that's one challenge potentially solved. So the next thing that, remember, Mona, who's an employee, has a little bit of a challenge of is she's got apps and systems everywhere. She's got manual things. And so having one place where Mona lands on, which helps her understand what she needs to do and what she needs to see, is really critical. Here, Mona can have some specific apps pre-pin and also action cards that enable quick actions, which we'll see a couple of examples later on. And she also has resources that are relevant to her at her fingertips. So this could be resources that might sit outside of Microsoft ecosystem. This might be websites, this might be forums, but these are all in a single place. And they're targeted to her so that Mona's experience is her experience. And that if another employee called Irina who works at Woodgrove accesses the application, she has a slightly different experience because it is tailored to her and is dynamic and respectful of the role that she does and the divide and where and her role in the organization. So going back to the dashboard, here there's a couple of things that Mona has access to. Again, this quick action is really critical. Having 65 systems or various manual things or knowing which app to go to accomplish something is not the most optimal way necessarily for Mona to function throughout her day. So she really wants to have a little bit of that cognitive unload, if there's such a thing, where she is not burdened with having to know the specifics of where to go to. The quick action cards on her dashboard are really great at that because it's something that allows it to really action an item. And there is a different system that might be behind it, but she doesn't really necessarily need to actively or consciously understand which application is kind of powering that experience. She's there just to clock in. So it's there is a UKG behind it that is really powering the experience of clocking in and clocking out. That seamless integration with the platform allows her to quickly action it without having to navigate between the different apps. So at this stage, she is also able to see announcements that are critical to her. So she can understand, for example, in this instance, that there are some holiday displays that are coming out to the store, and so she can really easily see it. There are various ways to bring attention to Mona's to bring Mona's attention to critical items. One such place is the announcements banner. It's that banner at the top, which is, again, it's time sensitive, quick operational updates that go there. And so this allows her to see those. The other thing that, again, we get kind of going through a combination of solutions to potentially challenges that we've seen that Mona would have at Woodgrove is that Mona is, this verbal communication, this opportunity to maybe connect with customers that might want to speak to her directly is something that can be enabled by having the single place, which allows her to direct access to customers as well. Now, the other thing that is really smart here is that when she's accessing this, the reason why that call came for her is that because she's clocked in and there's actually some shift awareness that she's working. So again, it's not that she's getting a call on her personal device when she is outside of working hours, maybe walking her dog, but it's actually when she is at work and she's clocked in and actively she's getting a phone call from the customer. Now here there is a couple of things that you can do. The customer is actually asking about a specific inventory item or stock item in the store. Without navigating away, she can actually check the inventory for today in the store. So this really allows it to see if there is, and again, this is a slightly simplified example, but this allows it to really, again, go back to those quick action cards and facilitate that action that she's most likely to need help with as directly from the dashboard. Now, one of the things that Mona is struggling with is, as she's essentially going about her day, this customer, this pesky customer, who's probably Irina, because I love asparagus, called Mona in the morning to check if asparagus is in store, because it's the asparagus season. And so when Mona is in front of Irina, and Irina is very demanding of her asparagus, and Mona says, "Hey, there is no asparagus actually on the shop floor. So let me actually, without stepping away from Irina, because she likes to maintain eye contact, let me check whether there is any asparagus maybe in the bag." So using, again, this is another solution, and yet for this instant communication with others who are clocked in and actively in the store leveraging the solution. So the walkie-talkie is something that allows it to instantly communicate with everybody who's connected to the same channel which would be kind of essentially like a frequency if we think about a push to talk scenario. So here I am actually able to ask Jasmine, or I'm able to broadcast my question to everybody who's connected to say, hey, do we have any of the special asparagus in store? Because Irina is very demanding of it. And Jasmine responds and says, yes, we do, which is great because Irina's happy and she loves asparagus, so she's all good, right? So now we're moving on to another example of solving problems. And again, hopefully what you're getting from this is that Mona feels highly empowered, not only to do the things that she needs to do, but she's also highly empowered to be highly effective and helpful to the likes of Irina, to customers, which again goes back to what are some of the reasons why adoption takes place, or what makes a solution valuable is that for Mona, who's an employee who might feel a little bit disempowered, that in her day-to-day, she has the tools to make her feel highly empowered, highly independent, because we all want to be able to do a great job. There's another example of how a potential solution to, again, real challenges that we have seen in the frontline might occur. So here you might have multiple languages. So if Mona is somebody who's actually, for whom English may not be a native language, so she's able to leverage translation capabilities to translate directly any messages that might be shared. So it could be something that could be auto-translated, or she could even set it up to be something that would be, the system, the application teams would ask her, do you want this message translated? So again, it really allows that very quick way for her to kind of connect and make sure that she understands the messages. And sometimes it's about confidence. It's not so much about I don't understand the language, but it's actually just double checking, making sure that, again, I feel empowered, I feel highly confident in the job that I do and what is being shared with me. So then we move on, as Mona moves through her day. The other place where, again, we hear a lot of the dissatisfaction, and where these kind of areas where problems exist and where value tends to lie is really in knowing what I need to do. Because again, going back to we all like to do a great job. This is one of the most critical parts of making sure that I feel engaged, because I want to be able, not only as an employee, I want to be able to know that not only am I doing a good job, but I know exactly how to accomplish it, and I know that I'm doing it in a timely manner. So here again, another place which really helps is making sure that we have all of the actions that are essentially assigned to Mona in one place. So here Mona can see information that is critical to her, action that she needs to do right now, instead of kind of really figuring out what should she be doing. This is also where she can easily confirm when the action is done. And so easily taking that off. So again, another thing that I want to make sure that we reinforce throughout, so going back to Lisa's original kind of architectural diagram, is that it's not that every single action resides within this application called tasks, which is surfaced in Teams. Those actions could be something that could be coming from maybe a fridge, or maybe some, from SAP. So these absolutely amazing ways to connect those critical systems that are on the back end without changing the processes on the back end, whilst enabling Mona to really make use of that, is a really empowering thing, also for the organizations that are providing this solution for her. So in this instance, this is actually a really good example of how an organization and Mona is, instead of Mona essentially going to and figuring out IoT systems, understanding and moving across various spaces in the store, the IoT and the refrigerator failure alert is directly integrated into the task. So when she starts that task, she can actually action the task without necessarily, and hopefully I can see it. No, no. So you're gonna have to, so we're missing a couple of screens, but you're going to have to imagine that when she clicks on the task, that she's actually taken to the system that allows her to complete the task, and then she's coming back into that system seamlessly. So without having to actually go anywhere else herself, the application solves the challenge of like cognitively connecting the various apps and tools that she has to navigate to accomplish the task in a simple way. Now we're moving on to the next set of challenges, and I know, thank you for bearing with me because we're kind of like, I feel a little bit like I'm getting anxious by all of these challenges that Woodgrove had and Mona has, and hopefully the solution really packs in a punch from solving it for her. But one of the core things that Mona feels, and I think I alluded to it, is, and we often see this on the front line, is that this disconnectedness from the organization. It's either tends to be really pivoted into Woodgrove is Woodgrove, and here's how you should feel about it, and here's what we're about. But that's not really what makes an employee like Mona want to stick around, want to really feel engaged and proud of working for the organization. She wants to feel part of a community. She wants to really truly belong to the organization. So this application also allows her through communities to connect to the various communities that matter to her. In one place, she can essentially go from everything from, really critical aspects of plant rearing. It is really, really important. Make sure that plants are kept alive. To also the more sort of the more related communities that might be around the store, or it might be around specific company initiatives. So an ERG, employee resource group, that might be relevant to her. So Mona feels, whilst working at a specific store in Woodgrove, that she's completely connected to all of the sustainability and social initiatives that might be empowered through community leadership in Woodgrove. Alrighty, okay. There is a lot of powerful capabilities that allow her to respond to polls and provide some answers to questions, but these are all different types of engaging. So it's not just text, but there's different modalities in which I can engage with the communities. And critically, there is a corner where Mona can get to know her leaders. So the people that are really there to inspire her, the people that are often providing direction to the store, to what her new uniform looks like, to some of the changes to asparagus stock levels that she's unable to really provide an answer to Irina, who's demanding asparagus. But leaders is a great way to have this direct connection that enables Mona to understand better the why some of these decisions are taking place. So leaders is a place where she can really truly ask questions, really understand. And this is also a place where leaders in her stores in the region and Woodgrove holistically can really connect to her directly as well. So now we're moving on to a place where essentially, and I know, and actually we'll probably ask this, I know we have a question about this, so stick with us, and I hope you provide an answer to this. But we know that Woodgrove, just like any other organization, is looking to enable generative AI experiences to their frontline. We've seen the example of IoT fridges. That's powered by AI, but that's been there for a while. Now you actually have Mona, who is, chatting even to her grandma over dinner, and even her grandmother is asking about ChatGPT. So Mona has all of these tools already installed because she, like most people, is having FOMO when it comes to a lot of this big excitement around generative AI. And so Woodgrove is seeing this and is wanting to ensure that Mona is also able to access those applications of these technologies and these advancements in a secure and compliant way. So within her chat, she's also got access to Copilot chat. Now here, there's a couple of things, and we'll go through those examples. Mona has access to the web, right, in a safe way, and she can ask questions where she really needs to understand how she's asking the question, but she can ask the question and essentially say, hey, do you have any particular, lactose-free options, right? And so Copilot chat, without much effort, can actually provide an answer to her that gives her some understanding. And often we do hear this a lot, that frontline employees tend to leverage their consumer grade tools to search for information which might be a little bit more challenging to access, like allergies. Whilst it's super critical bit of information, they often just go to a consistent one source, which might be their favorite web search, or in case of Mona, it used to be her favorite consumer grade conversational experience, but now it's Copilot chat. Again, I know I'm making a little bit of fun of this, but it really genuinely going back to the problems that are worth solving. Copilot chat right now is really what we're seeing customers trying to solve with this is really access to this great tech in a safe and compliant way. And so that's what she has access to. But also Woodgrove wants to create some really targeted, specific experiences that are powered by generative AI. And so they also offer her a dedicated agent that helps her process things like returns. So returns is an example of an agent that Mona has access to. And in this instance, she's actually able to really get answers in a hopefully easy way for her, in a conversational way for her to get the responses that she needs out of the hundreds and hundreds of PDFs that are actually containing this information. So remember, going back to the challenges that Woodgrove has, they have information in PDFs that tend to be either printed out on big binders in the back office or tend to be in SharePoint, which again is great, but it can be a little bit challenging as you're going and searching for the right information. So going back to and what we're seeing consistently at the beginning where we saw the dashboard and now, Woodgrove is trying to cater for the challenges and cater for the right user journey, for the right experience for Mona to get to the outcome that she needs without really spending too much time figuring out different apps or places to go to. It's all in one place for her to go and access. Okay, and this is the poll question that I was hoping we can ask everybody. I know because we couldn't not talk about AI. You'd hate if we didn't talk about AI, but I would love to hear from you if AI, generative AI, I mean, I'm assuming predictive AI is already part of it, is part of the frontline worker experience. Is it a priority for you? Or is it something that is just not something that is at all top of mind for you? Once again, second attempt at sipping water without spilling it all over myself. Success.
Looks like we have a blend. Several people have said, yes, it is a priority. Quite a few people have said no, so maybe that's not quite the point that they're at yet in terms of their journeys.
Excellent.
And small number with in our plans, but not yet a priority. So
Excellent.
that's, thank you for sharing. Maybe you can bring us home, Irene, with the last few scenarios quickly so we can move into how we can start scoping towards a solution.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you for sticking with me. I think one, and I reinforced it at the very beginning, an area where you tend to have challenges, it tends to be scheduling, tends to be that, and again, maybe that's not necessarily an example for yourselves, but at Woodgrove, there have been some not great practices at essentially enabling, you know, managers allowing work, or maybe frontline employees like Mona feeling that she doesn't necessarily have access to all the work that is available. So here you have an opportunity to really integrate a system like UKG in the case of Woodgrove to drive an experience that isn't necessarily directly maybe supported yet because you have multitude. Woodgrove has multitude of new stores that they've brought in, but the front end is that. So it enables the employee to actually manage their shift a bit more effectively. So Mona can set availability so that her manager is clear about the swap shift, and there's some traceability around it, and there are rules around it that are respected. And it's not rules that are set in Teams, it's rules that are actually set within UKG that are respected as she's trying to maneuver some of these scheduling requests. She can offer a shift, and she can offer a shift to an entire team because Mona has some really incredible things, like she's going on this whole asparagus rearing course as she learned that asparagus can grow at home, and she's very excited about it. And so there's options for her to do that, and there's also options for her to look at scheduling and picking up schedule or shifts across multiple locations. Again, having access to work, so resourcing is there without necessarily getting a lot of employees in individual stores and we know is a big challenge in retail. So this is a really nice way to enable that kind of cross-location shift marketplace without necessarily having to change a lot of the back end. So as we move through this, and just to get us to the last few examples of solutions that could be solving problems, there is also an opportunity for Mona at the end of the day to, like we clocked in, to clock out. So here she is clocking out, and this is where she is at the end of her day. Now, I know we went through a lot of scenarios, and we're going to go into more detail around which places to go and hunt for value, but I'd love to hear from you if there's anything in particular that really resonated with you, that we can maybe go back to as examples as we kind of iterate through the next steps. Okay.
Looks like communications between peer-to-peer and manager to team is very popular. A lot of folks looking to solve that, as well as corporate communications. That resonates with what we see from many of our customers as a starting place that they want to go solve challenges. Some task management, some shift management, a little bit on AI. Awesome.
Excellent.
Thank you, Irina, for walking us through the story that in the future Woodgrove could be articulating. And it was a lot of experiences that they brought to bear. So one of the things that I think is really important as we step into the next piece is you don't have to do all of this at once. In fact, we strongly encourage you, and we'll see throughout kind of the next little section, we're going to talk about thinking thoughtfully around identifying problems to solve, but then also how to scope to get started in meaningful groups of updates that may be relevant to you based on a variety of different factors of what you're trying to solve. So scoping so that you can maybe start smaller or in a contained amount and then expand over time. So let's start first with just talking a little bit about how you might discover what's needed. So this goes back to some of the finding value that we were talking about at front. And the very beginning mindset to maybe put yourself into is to start with a simple question around what's needed, by whom, and why. So when we think about this question and kind of digest it a little bit, part of being able to put ourselves into the shoes of employees and be able to have some empathy for a frontline worker and the tasks at hand and the problems we want to solve, there's a couple of different ways that you could go about doing this to insert yourself into that. So we can get some strong understanding of what problems we're trying to solve by really exploring problem statements. So being able to articulate how we might describe in common language the problem we're looking to solve, as well as what the outcome might look like. We can also immerse ourselves a little bit in terms of the who. So thinking through what a particular persona needs to do and have shared understanding of what matters to them, what could be a meaningful outcome or a change for them to help make their lives or their jobs better as they're going about serving your organization, perhaps your customers, perhaps your outcomes. And then finally, thinking about framing user stories a little bit, which help describe in a very short narrative some of what an experience might be, and then what an outcome could be. So we're actually going to spend the next couple of slides just taking a little bit of a look at user stories, because they're a very accessible way that anybody can approach thinking about crafting a quick statement or a short narrative that describes what problem you're trying to solve, for whom, and why. Anyone can do this. You don't need special skills other than being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and be curious about what that might be. There's a variety of different formulas you can use to approach writing user stories. We're going to show a couple and show a few of what good looks like, but you can certainly adapt this to some of your needs as you're thinking about it. So think of user stories again as like one sentence or a short narrative that describes a little bit some of the work that a person may be doing. So it's not the how they do it, it's not they go to Outlook or Teams, but it's what they're doing, and then a little bit of what it might look like to be successful at the end. So this focuses on describing the person who's doing the work. It's focusing on clarifying the reason for the requirement that you're going to be articulating. It defines it in language that has meaning specific to the role, not through the technology being used. It frames some of the high-level requirements that might surface that you may need to plan for later. And then it breaks down maybe your overall vision. So as you're thinking about some of those problems, if you're a Woodgrove that you wanted to solve, it helps break down and focus on some manageable items for how you might accrue to that. So a couple models you might have here, for example, is you might structure out as a sentence that's, as a insert your person. So maybe as a manufacturing employee, I want to easily and quickly be able to submit my time schedule so that I don't have to go back to the back room and look at it inefficiently on a piece of paper. I'll have some better examples in just a moment. Another way that we've used this, that we've had success with customers and also used within Microsoft ourselves, is having sort of posing the question of how might we help a particular persona to achieve some goal or perform an activity and then describing what makes it hard. So it's a little bit of a different way of framing user story. So let's take just a quick look here at a couple of examples so you can see how that first approach might be successful. So if you were to write something that's digitized request for an expert form, you can see we're missing some important components there. We don't have the user type. We don't express what the user need is or why that might be valuable. So a second pass at that could be, as a production line lead, I can request support from experts using an online form that would cut the time to line issue resolution. So that's a little bit better, but might still be missing a few pieces like the reason and the business value doesn't have quite sufficient clarity, missing a bit on the specificity on the user type, or what the particular users need. So our last pass at the very bottom, which is lengthy, I'm not going to read it out completely, but you'll note that it includes some specific pieces around the specific role from a production line lead. It also articulates clearly what the need is. They want to be able to escalate to request support without needing to repeat the issue. And it has some tangibility in terms of what the outcome might be so that they can reduce some of the current waiting time for troubleshooting help from 3 days down to 1 day. So that gives a very clear framing in terms of what problem we're trying to solve and who may benefit. So one of the really important things, just stepping back from a discovery work, is to think about how this is a place to get curious and start asking questions or become storytellers. So again, it's less about just yes or no, it's less about technology, but it's really exploring with some richness a story that references a persona. Doesn't include how you might implement that. It's told from another person's point of view and provides some insight. So you'll see we've got a very clever acronym around SPICIER to help you remember some key aspects here to help you articulate a clear story from a user perspective that, again, that doesn't go into how you might solve that problem. So now let's transition next. I think now we'd like to learn just a little bit as you're thinking, and this may align with some of the scenarios that resonated for you previously, but as you think about specific problems you're trying to solve. So for example, some of those of you who articulated communications, what are the problems from a communications perspective you're trying to solve? We'd love to just hear a little bit of feedback from you.
Thank you. And as people are sharing their perspectives, one of the things that again it's almost, and I know we sort of wish it's so easy to visualize a solution, but actually the most, it's really important to spend an uncomfortable amount of time, as Lisa knows, I love doing that, an uncomfortable amount of time in the problem space. Let's explore the problem. Let's feel it together. Let's understand it. But I know I sort of make fun of it, but it is important to understand the problem because it's if you, especially if you have a large team that is delivering a solution, I've often found that where in projects where everyone's aligned on the problem, that's great because then we can assess solutions, so to which there might be multiple solutions to one problem in terms of how its relative merit or effectiveness of solving that problem. So it really creates better alignment as a kind of consensus across stakeholders. Whereas if you're trying to solve a particular solution, there's more likely a kind of disconnect or disagreements around solutions, the buttons. It gets really more challenging. So I really encourage everybody to spend an uncomfortable amount of time in the problem space.
And it looks like we have some input from folks around, looks like there's some patterns around communicating within region, maybe connecting corporate messaging more closely to stores. Let's see, there's some other problems they're trying to solve. Some on-prem solutions, perhaps that's moving from on-prem, it's not clear. Sometimes the word cloud, some answers. Sharing files amongst stores, addressing experience levels with technology. So it's an interesting and I think common set of patterns that we see across our customers. Irene, I'm going to turn back over to you quickly to just recap a little bit of some of the common scenarios and starting points we're hearing from customers.
Great, thank you so much. So as you've seen with Mona and Woodgrove, we tend to, whilst the industries do matter because there's this industry specificity, but actually when you think about when it comes to Frontline and where you could almost go and hunt for problems that are worth solving, and you've shared it, communication is a critical part of it. But one thing I would encourage everyone as you're thinking through the communication, it's been really clear around what type of communication, who needs to communicate to whom and for what purpose. So going back to those user stories, understanding and articulating the sender, the receiver of communication, and the purpose is really, really critical, because actually what might end up happening is that whilst communication is the problem, maybe the solution is something like actually like tasking, because the thing that I'm struggling to communicate effectively with maybe my store associates is a specific action that needs completed. And I know this sounds very, very simple, and I'm not trying to you all experiencing this, and thank you for sharing your perspectives and kind of your organizational challenges, but communication tends to be just the richest place for challenges. Then we'll see bringing tech ecosystem together. So, and I know some of you have said that you might have some, disparate systems or maybe some on-prem systems. So really bringing a lot of the technical investments that have happened over the years place that is really uber focused on simplifying the experience for an employee like Mona. So it's really tailored to her. And the best way you can think about, again, so what does Microsoft have to offer? It offers a very, very flexible, whilst also very stable UX, a canvas where you can craft the actions that need to be completed, right? Craft the experiences that really matter to Mona and tailor those critical actions and outcomes that you would like Mona to be able to easily achieve. So bringing this tech ecosystem together, it isn't just about having 25 apps just now in a single place. It's actually reimagining accessing workforce management system without having to go to the workforce management system, enabling those core actions that I needed. And then other places to explore is employee well-being and engagement, another super rich area of challenges. And I know I touched on this because there's so many different schools of thoughts and science behind what it takes to be engaged, but it goes back to I want to feel independent. I want to feel like I'm the master of my trade. And I really want to have a sense of purpose. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's not that I'm just being told to do it. So when you kind of hit on all of those three core factors, then employees do have and report a higher sense of engagement. And then the fourth factor that I would bring in that we hear consistently is having a voice. So communities, an aspect of being able to voice, just not necessarily it's just about being able to voice and having an outlet for my opinions is really critical. Scheduling and coverage management is we've touched this huge place of improvement, and this one tends to be really interesting because it goes both ways. There's a lot of benefits on making sure that you're utilizing the resources as an organization in the right way, and there's flexibility that you're offering, whilst at the same time making sure that employees are kind of having this like feeling really highly empowered of their time. And then process digitization, it tends to be one of the first places that people tend to look at. And then training and onboarding, as we've mentioned, is again a critical area. One thing as we move on to some of the next steps is I wanted to mention that most often, whilst, and Lisa mentioned it, you kind of start small. One of the things that we're seeing tends to be the case is that it's really a combination of challenges across a couple of these kind of scenario buckets that tend to bring the best value to your employees. So really looking across, not just solely focused on one. So even if even if your project or program is focused on communication, I would encourage you almost to do a little bit of a checklist to understand other challenges that could be easily solved across other buckets of experiences that may impact your employees. And as I get into this, we essentially have, lastly, as we sort of look at those buckets, I do tend to see we tend to see that what you tend to approach a problem with, you either tend to approach it from a comms angle, like we need to enable comms, or you tend to approach it from a technical angle. We need to enable bringing all of these tech things together because it's completely not effective. But ultimately, all of these things combine together. And so it's not just about starting from one end to the other, but it's actually looking, again, I really encourage you all to have a look at all of the various places where challenges might exist, and understanding if there's a quick way to win, a quick value to offer to your employees. So on the expanding value based on scenarios, so again, you could start from very small, and again, we've seen this, it tends to be really interesting what tends to hunt. For adoption to really be something that happens, again, it needs to be highly valuable. It needs to solve my problem. And sometimes the problem could be as simple as just unable to have access, to feel excluded from this digital world that Woodgrove for my organization has. So that tends to be actually a really rich area for solutions. Then we move on to kind of this middle value, which is really around Mona's productivity. It's less about her functioning well with others. It's more about her getting things that she needs done effectively. And where we're seeing huge amount of gains, especially for the organization, is really around enabling that Mona's interactions and productivity gains paired with her colleagues like Jasmine. So when you're enabling others to connect as well, then you're having increasing value. But with that also comes some increasing complexity. So it's understanding and mapping out as we think about it, do we want to stick with the simple and basic and maybe have a risk of not necessarily having the high adoption, or do we stick with the more kind of higher value use cases and scenarios that would really drive a lot of value, but might take a little bit more to evolve. So as we think through this, and maybe this is where I hand over to Lisa to share our next poll. I know we do want to hear from you. It's really helpful, is to think through some of your maybe current blockers that you might have. So the current challenges that, like, especially if you have any reflections on what we've discussed around like challenges and blockers that you might want to solve or might want to overcome, or just share with us. And I think the next bit, I believe, Lisa, you were walking us through.
Yep, correct. We'll give just a moment for the poll. Looks like challenges around best practices, which is going to be a great segue into some of our next section, because we've covered a lot of both art of the possible, which is a wealth of opportunity, as well as how to start getting a little bit practical in terms of what problems you might want to solve. And now we're going to get even more practical a little bit, which is really thinking a little bit about how can you start scoping to get moving a little bit quickly. So looks like, as I'm just watching some of the feedback come in, looks like folks have some challenges with like people being accustomed to ways of doing things already, which can be a big hurdle when we're driving change with folks. And process change can be challenging. Maybe that's a good segue here in terms of thinking about starting scope. And of course, back to Irina's point of as pro-sci practitioners, where we repeat things a lot. Again, you don't have to solve everything all at once. So part of the intention we want to talk about here a little bit is thinking about how might you identify the right next place. Like if you want to go peel the onion around communications, how do you identify what's the right place to get started? And there's a number of different factors and considerations we've approached our customers with. Irina, maybe we could just do a little bit of dialogue here that where we can weave in some customer experience. So I'm wondering if maybe as a starting point, you could tell us a little bit about where you see customers tripping up or getting stuck in terms of getting started or driving value, identifying their priority, and how do you help them navigate that?
Yeah, well, I think it's so I shared an example before where it tends to be not doing enough to understand the problem and aligning on the problem that we need to solve. And then that problem needs to be something that isn't just a problem that, leadership or people who are responsible for the program or for the project figuring out. It needs to be something that frontline employees like bonus share firsthand. We need to hear from them around what are those challenges. So they are the ones who will say, here's, I'm actually okay with going to 20 apps. Like that's maybe part of, it's not ideal, but actually, like, I love the fact that I know all of these unique applications that are so unique to my industry. So maybe that's not the challenge that we're looking to solve, but actually what they're not okay with, as Lisa had said, is I am, putting in my, hundreds of steps in, which is great, but I would love to put a little bit fewer steps, especially if I'm having to do this a lot, because I have to go back and look at the printed board where I see this. Or maybe it's something, so again, looking at, one, articulating the challenge as the project, the program, the people who are actually sponsoring this work understand it. Verifying whether that is actually the problem, or does it look a little bit different? Does it materialize a little bit differently on the frontline spaces, or from a frontline colleague's perspective, is really critical. And so once that happens, once there is this alignment on the problem, then things tend to go really fast. Whereas absence of that, you see kind of these solutions that are half-baked, not necessarily great, and then you have some disengagement from various stakeholders in the project side that tends to be not ideal. So that maybe is one that I think seeing consistently. And yeah.
Awesome. The other thing that I know we've seen a lot of patterns on are around customers are often scoping based on compelling circumstances. So, and those can be positive or negative, or maybe seemingly, I was going to say negative, but maybe it's like they hadn't planned on that. So, Abby and I were talking last night about a customer that, has invested in, kind of a newfound corporate initiative around removing paper-based processes within a very defined period of time, which is a compelling circumstance that they've kind of taken on themselves by choice. But we also see customers who, maybe have other circumstances that are less by choice. So I'm wondering how you leverage those kinds of circumstances with customers to help them be able to scope as well.
Yeah, I think this is, there's again different modalities, like different ways to approach it. Like it's, and I think it's this famous project management triangle, resources, timing, etc. Like so, there's essentially one of, again, the big challenge that some customers face is that if they're very good at identifying the problem and wanting to get it right, then they're just stuck in this wanting to get it right for a very long time. And they're unable to move forward. So they get into paralysis. And then you have these 2.5 year plus projects that are like tech based, but essentially by the time they get to the front line, deliver minimal value because the tech's out of date and the problems might have already moved on. So it's finding that sweet spot where either you put yourself this timeline that says, hey, the tech's actually arguably, and I know a lot of people who might be in the space saying, oh, no, Irina, no, tech is complicated. Well, tech arguably is getting a lot simpler. So that shouldn't be the thing. So nothing should be stopping you from figuring out what does a time-bound, 8-week plan. And I tend to do this with my customers. I kind of say, like, what can we do in 4 weeks? What can we do in 6 weeks? What can we do in 8 weeks? And actually forcing to build, deploy, and try something out is really great, because the other thing that we know consistently is that the solution that you are delivering to your frontline will be out of date Ideally, not almost instantly, but it will be out of date. So you want a platform that you can quickly evolve. And so this is again another reason why you just want to find a nice little kind of, whether it is a time bound, like there's a compelling event, like something's going, is being deprecated or is being sunset. These are great. These are great business and tech time kind of pressures to deliver and put an outcome out. But then also understand that ideally what you're looking for is to deliver a platform that is then easy to change, to modify, to create. And that's one of the reasons why I think, and obviously I would think, but I definitely do see this, that Microsoft solution tends to be one of the best in the market for providing that kind of almost evergreen, flexible platform that once you land some value, you can iterate on.
I think that the incumbent solutions is kind of interesting too. We've worked with a number of customers this year, particularly who were moving off of Meta Workplace due to their deprecation. That's public knowledge, but that also invites in some of the practices that we've been talking about around not doing like a feature by feature checkbox, but really stepping back into the, we used an incumbent experience for these kinds of situations and to solve these kinds of problems. Are those problems still relevant today? And how might we solve them again in maybe a new way or an evolved way, or maybe there's a new set of experiences as well. One of the other things that I think comes into play, and you mentioned this a little bit related to the triangle, but also factoring in kind of an overlay of how much change a company can manage. And that may be on both the technical side as well as user change. So I'm curious if you have a couple of examples for how you've helped customers, either assess or manage a little bit of how much change they can take on at a particular time.
Yeah, so I think this, again, this tends to be, it's very interesting. I think frontline space is changing a lot. I remember when I was managing kind of the technical aspects of frontline in an industry that is highly regulated, it was kind of almost a norm, and it still is a norm across a lot of industries, where frontline tech doesn't get touched for like 5 years, right? Like we've done it once, we're not going to touch it for 5 years. And it's really critical to move away from that. So I think one of the things that we tend to do is really look at how does this change, how can this change offer value, and how can this change that you're bringing, the solution that you're bringing, actually be part of the change management going forward. The thing is, if one of the most critical aspects of change management is effectively communicating, if you don't have a way to communicate, well, you won't be able to do any change management. So really looking at this as an enabler as well as the actual thing that is a change. So I think it's a hard one, and there is never a good time, because there's never a good time to do anything. But that's why you almost have to be brave, embrace it, and say, you know what, there is 25 million benefits as to why we should be doing this. And there's a lot of no's, none of the no's offer the benefits of the yeses. And so really kind of convincing yourself, convincing the stakeholders, making sure that it's not just a one-off thing, but it's a platform that allows you for that continued change is really critical. But yeah, it's not easy. And actually, I'm just gonna share this. I think empathy. We're all humans, and sometimes it feels like, oh, this change is happening. We're gonna pull some more change in. We're gonna pull some more change in. I think it's just being mindful, empathetic, trying things out. And when you're trying a new initial pilot, when you're trying technology, make sure that you're not only looking at the feasibility of the solution, but you're looking at the feasibility of how change that comes with it will affect employees. So that would be the other kind of best practice that I would recommend.
Awesome. I think the other thing that we see that kind of informs scope is a little bit of the how, where, and when users will actually access this. So this dovetails a little bit into some of those practices that we saw play out in some of the Woodgrove example around kinds of devices and maybe on shift, off shift. So maybe you could just give us a couple of high level considerations across those as well that inform scope.
Yeah, because again, it's sort of like sometimes with in my work now, whether it's customers or partners, we go in and we want to solve the big challenge around engagement or the big challenge around these big buckets that we've seen, and then actually then you're looking at what is limiting your practical deployment, and it does tend to be that's why it's the bottom layer in this diagram when you think about your solution. It tends to be actually identity and devices. Having a decision around whether the scope of your solution is something that you want Mona to have access to outside of working hours. Is this going to be valuable to her to access outside of working hours? Or is it something that is purely during working hours? And then you're looking at, okay, if it's purely shared devices at work, what are some of the things that we can bring in there? So once we identify the strategy, then in that case, maybe, especially if it's a shared device, maybe it's less protected, especially if it's changed rapidly. Maybe for the first round, it's not necessarily ideal to put in some critical information about Mona's benefits straight in there. Maybe it's actually mostly focused around benefits that she would get, the point that the reason why she would even pick up a shared device. So this is really interesting to look at. When we look at BYOD, again, make a decision as an organization. Are we actively supporting this, or are we going to be actively managing against it? Because that's a really critical kind of fork on the road where you say, if we're managing BYOD, so we're okay with it, but we want to know that people are accessing it. What else matters? Do we need to make sure that we have on shift and off shift access? So what it means is that when Mona is picking up her mobile phone at home, when she's outside of working hours, what experience do you want her to have? Do you want her to still be able to go in and read messages, etc.? Or do you actually want to suppress it and say something like, Mona, you've done a great job today, just rest. Like, I'll see you on the next shift. So again, all of these experiences are possible. So looking in that compliance aspect on the experience of the device at the point at which I'm accessing this accessing the solution is really critical. When we look at the back office PC, it's really thinking around on shift scenarios, of course, but actually we do see a lot of access to payslip, scheduling information, a lot of private information that is purely supported on the back office PC. And I think in this day and age, it's a little bit not okay because often employees tend to forget how to sign off. So please make sure that you're being respectful to the employee as you're enabling these scenarios. So really thinking around, how, again, the experience, at which point will Mona walk into the and walk up to the back office PC? What is the thing that what is motivating her to get there to this device? And then think around a solution that would enable getting there. And again, it's not about having one or the other. Majority of our customers end up evolving across all three types of device profiles. So, but it's maybe that's one way to naturally scope down or naturally understand where should I be focusing for the problems to be solved, is looking at the device and the identity as a natural, almost like scoping limiter of the experience. And on that, maybe I know we're kind of rapidly running out of time. It'll be phenomenal to hear if you have a particular frontline device away from bring your own device altogether, or you're someone who's actually interested in this. So maybe it's in scope. So would love to hear from you. We also have a lot of again, kind of, and this wasn't in the previous slide, but we have a lot of regulated industries which tend to want to provide dedicated experience that are off the clock as well as on the clock, but in a safe and secure way where compliance is really critical. So they tend to actually provide corporate owned devices to their employees. And again, there are benefits to that because employees view it as a perk. But then we also see how not to do it, which is really get a super cheap device that doesn't function very well. And then you see those devices being logged somewhere and then people still use their personal device. So being careful around the benefits that you're trying to gain there is critical.
Looks like we have a good mix. A lot of folks are replying around shared mobile devices or shared desktop, but a little bit on BYOD and corp-owned devices as well.
All right. Excellent. Well, I think in this case, I'm actually, because I covered more of this before, So just to kind of conclude around the time, the device, the identity, this is super critical when you're thinking around the challenges that are worth solving, because it isn't just about kind of business challenges where Mona is a participant of the process. It's really understanding how can you deliver something of value fast, knowing that it's compliant, understanding some of those other limitations around identity and devices. And on this, I would love to maybe hand over to Lisa, who can share more of the best practices around driving successful adoption at scale.
Thank you, Irina. So we are not going to replicate what fine industries such as ProSci do at length and at depth in terms of all of the fantastic guidance you could have. There's a lot of customers that have best practices and organizational structure in place to help drive adoption. But we wanted to highlight just a couple of things that are very complementary to what we just talked about around leading with value, identifying problems you're trying to solve, that are concepts we reinforce with our customers, and also are the ones that our most successful customers exemplify. So the first is having an executive sponsor to help drive the change. And really critically, it's fantastic if you actually have a leader from the business as well as a leader from IT who are working in unison, both on what problems they're trying to solve from a business point of view, as well as helping prioritize and implement the most important pieces that are required to make those make the solution real to address those problems. An executive leader helps you prioritize, clear through blockers, set the right tone in terms of the level of importance and the value to both the organization as well as to employees. Secondly, being able to think back on solving problems for a frontline worker and putting ourselves in their shoes. It's really, really important as you're thinking about a pilot to include people actually in the roles that you're trying to help address problems for. So pulling in frontline workers and managers into a pilot process where they get hands-on early, where they are able to provide feedback both on the technology experience, but also on maybe some of your communications and training approach, allows you to continue to iterate quickly before maybe you go out to a larger mechanism. So as an example, I was just working with a large retailer and they elected to just have one pilot store that they went out first in order to get feedback and insights on what their training plan was and how they were telling people about the value to themselves or value to those workers, and as well as making sure that all of the technology pieces worked. And that allowed them to then just start rolling out now to 50 stores, which is fantastic after they did some iteration based on real user feedback. That's the purpose of the pilot, and it's super helpful to you. The other two pieces I'm going to hit on the next slides, one around having an effective readiness path, and then also how you can put M365 to work to support your efforts. Irina, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there are kind of three core building blocks to having an effective plan around driving readiness to your users. The first is being able to create excitement about new experiences. Change can be something that brings enthusiasm, but also can bring anxiety or concern or worry to people. And some people maybe are faster to adapt to change or slower to adapt to change. So having an effective awareness campaign that helps reinforce what this change is doing for them within their role, what's the value to them, and sometimes using people who are most influential, say a direct manager, to help land some of those messages can be really effective in terms of driving awareness ahead of the change and then supporting as people are adapting to new technology that's supporting them in their work. Complementing that, having a training plan that allows you to both help people be new users to a new experience and feel confident that they can do some of the basic things they need to do. And then also being able to have a path for helping them become more proficient users is super important. These can be small snackable things. We've seen people do like quick assigned actions on a daily basis to help their workers get familiar with something that's new. But we've also seen videos. We've seen text-based training resources, a whole variety of things that kind of blends in both with maybe your corporate approach for delivering training, but also meets the needs of people, because we know as humans, people learn in very different ways. And finally, being able to have a support plan in place that helps those users, helps them answer how-to questions, or helps them get their devices set up if they're in a BYOD situation. So it's really important to be able to have some connectedness around support for where they need to be able to move forward. Now let's talk real quickly on how you can activate Microsoft 365. You're investing this time in terms of bringing great experiences. How can you actually have that play into the experience you're trying to drive? So a couple of quick great things that we've seen. We've seen people take great advantage of the home dashboard to surface announcements that are relevant to, hey, welcome, here's a new start of your day. Here's some new things to know, or cards that direct to a getting started set of resources, or allow them to share maybe a tip of the week. We've also seen people use communities, for example, to share questions and best practices. Irene, I know you had an example around gamifying. Do you want to share that just real quickly while we're wrapping up?
Yeah, I think that was one of the, because again, going back to like what's critical is that, you know, I learn from my peers, so having that peer network is great, but actually what's critical is that my manager and my superiors really I invested in me changing some of that behavior, because they're the ones who tell me, yeah, that's what you should be doing. And so there's a really great example of a UK retailer that's leveraged essentially a customized dashboard that would pull metrics around adoption from various regional units, really putting the regional managers kind of head to head. They really made fun of it. So essentially really gamifying the adoption of the tech as a way to then sort of say, yeah, you won. And it was really great. So really focusing, measuring the outcomes in a way that makes sense. There's a reason why this was happening. And I just love that example. That really drove successful adoption for that particular organization.
Excellent. Thank you. One of the other things we hear from customers as a confidence booster is they don't want to be alone. So I can just assure you, none of you on this call will be the first ones going forward with implementing experiences for your frontline, leveraging M365 technology. So you can see we've got some great showcases across the travel industry with American Airlines, manufacturing with ConAgra, retail with Domino's, retail with Co-op. It's really great opportunity to go learn a little bit about what other customers are doing. So you can go surface those. These are all public case studies, so you can go take a look at them quickly as well as you see fit. So let's move into a quick little wrap up. We do have some resources that are available for you publicly that can help you orient to how to get started, thinking maybe about just getting started with some core experiences in Teams, bringing in a dashboard and moving forward. And then we have a more extensive playbook to help you get moving faster where you see fit. Let's see, we're just about at the top of the hour, so maybe we could move a little bit into just wrapping up for what's next here. We had Q&A. I don't know that we're going to have time now for live. Hopefully you've taken away a couple of really important success factors that we've talked about throughout the day. Bringing value to your frontline workers, starting with what you want to solve before you start layering on the technology. Starting with something that can be smaller and rapid time to value, and then having time and opportunity to optimize and expand. And then lastly, really thinking about how you can take advantage of all of those capabilities that could come together to really help you hone in and make that experience yours through a combination of pre-built capabilities as well as ones that you can customize. All right, I know we're at the top of the hour, so real quick, I just want to surface what's next. Irina, maybe you'd hop to the next slide. We have, as I mentioned up at the top, whole series going through August, and our next session will actually be on the 27th, focused on communications. We would love to have you participate to come learn a little bit more, dig in on that. Probably relevant for so many of you who indicated communications is a top thought for you. And then lastly, I'm going to pop a quick poll while we're talking about that. And then we would also really appreciate, if possible, your feedback. It's essential for how we continue to fine tune some of our sessions as we're delivering them to you. So we would love to have you take just a quick moment out of your day, if you wouldn't mind, to provide feedback and select the Frontline Friday series as you're providing feedback on the survey. Thank you so much for spending 90 minutes of your Friday with us. I greatly appreciate the time and energy you've put into spending with us. Very valuable for us to always hear from you as well. And I hope you took away something valuable as well.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you so, so much. And apologies, I spoke at length about Mona's experience, but I hopefully you have found it and your feedback's been absolutely phenomenal. So really appreciate everyone's time. And thank you, Lisa.
Likewise. Thank you, Irina. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a great day and a great weekend.